screen share there. I just sent a link out to you guys a minute ago. Yeah, so I think the idea is to kind of talk through the email templates that we have so far, and in particular, the kind of 3 versions we have for the action alert and fundraising template. And the sort of big decision there you're making is on approach, especially with that graphic near the top that has the text on top of it. We just kind of need to pick, do you want to do that using Photoshop tools? Do you want to do that with a lot of code, or do you want to do that with this sort of hybrid approach, which we've been messing with and I think now have got working pretty good? I don't know why that video is. We're all going to have to go watch it. Okay, I'm looking at the Engage dashboard. And if it's all right, because yesterday you could hear me on the recording, but you couldn't hear questions you guys were asking, I'm going to put you guys on speakerphone and hopefully turn off your speakers if you're using them or whatever on the screencast so you don't get feedback, but that should be fun. Okay, you guys still there?
Yes, sir.
Great. So taking a look at our emails. So this part I think you guys have seen before at least, but the idea here is whichever version we pick, the way that you will use these is you come into your email tab here, and then down at the bottom you can see there's all the emails you have sent are in some draft stage. And in this case, when you're looking for the templates we've made, the quick way to find them is just to use this little PT tag we put at the front of most stuff we work on. And that'll pull up all the templates that we've made. And we have a surfeit of templates right now. We have a bunch of them. In particular, we have 3 different versions of the action alert and fundraising template. We're going to look at all 3 of those, but we're not going to keep all 3 of them. We're going to pick one that we like the best or we think works the best, and then we'll get rid of the other 2. No matter which one we pick, you'll still keep all the source code's the same for all of them. You'll keep all the original code and all the graphics and stuff like that. So you could go back and recreate any of these ones if you want to, but just to get rid of clutter, we'll try and pick one and stick with that. And then, so if you were actually if we had already decided this was perfect and you were gonna make an email from this template, the way you would do that is you'd come over here to the right and you'd clone the email, and that'll make just an exact copy of the template, obviously, and then you can go in and edit all the stuff about it. For the sake of looking at them today, we're gonna work with the actual templates, but usually you wouldn't wanna do that, because if you make a change in the template, then obviously every time you go back and copy it, you'll copy whatever that was, which might not necessarily be an error. It might just be, the January bird of the month email, but you still probably don't want that content reproduced every time.
Do we want to just, every time we do this, we want to clone it, correct?
Exactly. So normally,
without changing the original.
Exactly. So come in, do a search for whichever template you're looking for. It might be the bird of the week or the action alert or whatever makes most sense based on what kind of email you're making, and then just use the clone key. So on these, if you do accidentally mess up or whatever, it's okay. We've specifically set up the targeting on these so that they will only send to me, to my personal Gmail address. So one easy way to know you are working with the template or you're working from a copy or whatever, it obviously says it at the top, but also if it's only going to one person and that person is me, you may be using the template.
Aditi, we probably ought to send out an email to everybody to let them know not to mess with these.
Is there, yeah, I'm just curious. I was just thinking the same thing. I wonder if there's a way to lock them. I don't know if there is.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we could lock them, but then you wouldn't be able to use them either. So to keep them so you can copy it, yeah.
Not lock them from us, but lock them from others. But I guess that's impossible. That's
yeah. No, there isn't a feature to do that in Engage really easily. That'd be a product requests we could put in. But the usual best practice is just say, tell people if you're working with an email template that starts with that bracket PT bracket tag, make sure you copy it first and then immediately change the name. And then you can do whatever you want. So this is, I'm starting with what I call the hybrid version. So it's built
can
all.
We also, will you look at, can we see it on email and after or before, whatever you want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. We can kind of flip back and forth. So in fact, let me get this one up because that's the e-newsletter. What's that? I'll log in here. And you said, Aditi, you were having trouble seeing the results tests?
Yeah, I'm not sure why. It would just, it would like come up, but it would be a blank page. And then so I was having issues with my home computer, so it might have been that. I'm not sure, but I tried here too, and I had the same issue.
Gotcha. Let's see. There we go. So this is the version that we're looking at now, the hybrid version. And you can see the problem we were having before was on Outlook in particular. And we have pretty well fixed that. That looks pretty good now on the Outlook versions. So the header area is spaced right. There's a couple things we may still want to change. We switched to this gray background and kind of had content floating on it. So you could put more boxing in there and you can mess with some of the padding in these things. I'll show you how to do that in just 1 second. But basically this works as intended now, which is to say this header image shows upright, it's centered, has the text on the left side, and that's all editable in the email template itself.
This is Outlook, sorry.
Yeah, this is Outlook 2013 on Windows 7.
Okay.
And if we go back one, it's pretty consistent across all the Outlooks. The thing that does change in Outlook, which is just like impossible to perfectly control for, is you can see the cropping and scale on the image tends to move around just a little bit. So it'll be something where you just want to test it a little bit and make sure when you're picking the images that will go in that background space, you pick something where the content is more towards the middle of the frame. This sort of, this would be true for any kind of design online anyway. But just wherever there's going to be a little bit of variation in the zoom and cropping and stuff, what we're worried about is the left to right spacing, making sure the picture still looks good or works right if it's a little bit more centered in the text. And then these headlines also, I'll show you how to try and control for this a little bit better, but the line breaks are a little bit squishy between different versions of Outlook. Most of them you can see render it just like you'd want to, but Outlook really likes to disregard paragraph breaks. And so it's tough to get that to work exactly the same every time. With fake content, it works a little bit better if you have actual words in there because it doesn't break words in half usually. And so if you have actual text in there, it tends to flow a little more naturally. So back to looking at the actual content. So when you come in here, there's 2 blocks of HTML. So this is slightly trickier to edit stuff, but we've made it pretty simple. And those 2, the way that they look on is it's this little block of text at the top that has the having trouble viewing this email, click here to see it online, and the block with the picture with the stuff in the background or stuff in the foreground. So looking at these ones, the way that you would edit this, if you can see, you just click on the email. It's actually pretty easy to edit. The only thing you can't see, obviously, in here, which does exist in the source code, is that because we hate it when you get the email, usually the first sentence or so of the email will show up in the preview next to the subject line. And so the subject line says, click here to save the wild birds. And then the very next thing in your email reader is trouble viewing this email, click here. So instead, we made a little space in the source code where you can write a little line of text. The CSS styling there.
That's like basically invisible, right?
Exactly. You don't see it, but it gets read by the email program. So this will show up right after your subject line. And if you decide you don't need that or whatever, you can delete all this content out, and that's fine too. Same thing goes for this intro text here. You were thinking it'd be nice to have the option to do that. If you didn't want to do it, you would just delete that text out like you would any other text in a WYSIWYG, and then it goes away. That all makes sense? So that one's pretty easy. The only tricky thing is the hidden block of text for the intro at the top. Editing the image with the background image is a little bit trickier, but not too bad. So you can see right in the WYSIWYG, you can change the headline text. Like I said, once you write actual text to fit in that spot, it'll be a little bit easier. It'll flow a little bit better and more consistently. You can see it'll space out for words, but doesn't space out for word breaks. So
is that black background going to be in all of them?
The shaded kind of this color here. Yeah. Yes, though you can change that if you want. There's always, we thought that most of the pictures you were using were pretty high key. And so as a result, we went with a darker background and white text. You can change that if you want. You can change the color of this font just by using the WYSIWYG stuff. And then if you go into the source view, there's a bunch more code where you could go change all that stuff if you want to.
Block of shaded text, for example, we want to put that at the bottom of the photo. Is that something we would do in the HTML, or is there another way to do that?
Yeah, the best way to do it would be in the HTML. So come into the source view, and if you use something like Dreamweaver or brackets or something like that that you use to edit on websites, you could also just copy this whole block in here and paste it into WordPress in the text view instead of in the WYSIWYG view, and you could mess around with it there. You can take this code out and edit it all together and put it back in if you want. But that would be how you would change stuff, like if you wanted to move the gray box here down to the bottom, it's just a little table that sits in the middle of the picture and has the background color. So you could change the background color, you could change the color of the font, and you can change where it is, the placement, all in the source code here. Could also change the width if you wanted to. So if you had a picture that was more aligned to the right, you could bump up the width of the table to give yourself more room for the headline on the left side. The two places, if all you want to do is change the, this is basically the right place for the headline, and basically you have the picture you want, but you want to change from that particular picture. You have to upload the link to the picture. And you do need an absolute URL for this to work. So that means you're going to need to upload the picture. When you put stuff into Salsa, it creates relative image links. So the image works fine in the email, but it doesn't exist other places on the internet when it's placed into an email like that. And if you go look at, I'll show you what I mean. You go to the assets in Salsa Engage. And you pull up any of your pictures. Normally we would say, oh, if I wanted to link to this image somewhere, I could just right click and copy the image address. But you can see what you actually get with that is this very long string of code, which will not work in all contexts. That was part of the problem we were having with the Outlook. Outlook doesn't like that relative image format. And so that was part of why it wasn't rendering the image or wasn't rendering it right most of the time. So the good news is, you already have a WordPress site where you upload pictures all the time. So one real easy way to do it would be to just take the picture you want to be in the background, upload it on your WordPress site, and that'll give you an absolute link, a permalink to that picture.
Oh, like to the media library, and that'll give us a link.
Exactly. So you can upload, it doesn't have to be on the WordPress site. You can put it somewhere else on Dropbox or something like that, so long as it's, you know, anything where you can get that kind of permalink or an absolute link to the image, as opposed to something that queries the Engage database. Once you've got it uploaded, you don't need the picture itself, you just need the link, and you paste it in right here. That's the first place, and then you also...
Quick question, is this going to impact our download time?
No.
Is the image going to take longer to download from if it's through the WordPress site?
No, it shouldn't. Unless there's some sort of big slowdown on your website. I would think, if anything, you know, your regular website probably gets slightly less traffic than the Salsa server, which you're sharing with a bunch of other organizations. So no, it shouldn't impact download time, not in a way that you or most people would notice anyway. So you put the image link here, and then you also need to put it down here. We call this the belt and suspenders approach. Basically, we render the image in two different ways to make sure most things read this fine. They're reading it as a CSS style, and it's pulling the image as part of the background for it. But Outlook and a couple of the desktop-based readers don't like that. So instead, we have this set of code that's just for Microsoft, basically, that puts it in the background and makes sure that it shows the same picture in all those contexts. And that's basically it. Any other questions about the top image there? Great. So everything else in here is pretty standard text that you can just edit. So, you know, you can change the text in here. We just have Lorem Ipsum style stuff there, but double clicking on any of those text blocks opens them up, and you can change the text in there. If you want to change the image, you can click on the pencil icon and it loads right into your Engage library. This one, it's fine to use regular pictures from your Engage library. We usually say this spot on the right, you know, it doesn't need to be as big of a picture. I think the biggest that renders on any browser is about, or any email viewer is about 200 pixels wide, but always good to have something a little bigger than you need. And then you can scale stuff right here if you want to. Get something that's a little different crop, you could bring it down a bit. And then this one is an HTML block just because it has, I don't know why it's an HTML block. I think there's some spacing on it, but it is just the text that shows up. Right under the picture there on the right-hand side box and above the button. And then ditto with the button. This is just built in Engage. So if you want to change the color of the button, you can do that right here through the WYSIWYG. You could go with your green instead of your orange color. You can also change, you know, whether you want expand means it'll sort of be as wide as the space fits. So you can change the sizing within the normal presets, change the corners, all that kind of stuff. And obviously you can edit the link either to one of your internal pages, or if you're linking to an action or a fundraising page, you can put the link in here. Ditto with all this stuff, they're just text blocks, so edit them however you want. And then these ones are also text blocks. We just added a little bit of formatting. This is just an image, so if you want to use the idea of the, you know, stylized signature in there, this is mine, obviously, so you probably don't want me sending your emails. But you can edit that just like any other picture file, so just upload a picture of a signature in a normal image format and sub that in. You can also, if you wanted to, you could stick in another picture of the person sending the email in there if you wanted to. And that's the spot for the photo credit you asked for. It's just set to be a little bit smaller font.
So you would stick the photo in the same graphic box?
Yeah, if you wanted to do, instead of doing a picture of the signature, if you wanted like a headshot in there, you could put that there.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to align it to the left, this is already aligned left, but you could set up the normal settings on the picture so that it would kind of, the text would flow around it a little bit more instead of being chunked on top of the signature.
And if we wanted to use both, we'd have to go into Photoshop and create an image. It has the headshot, and then the signature below it, and just upload that image.
It's an interesting question. I think if you wanted to add, a headshot above the signature, you could just put in another image block right here. It likes to stick things at the top there. What if I just pick, let's pretend this is a picture of the executive director or something like that. So you just put it in like this and then move it up. So if that was a picture of the person writing the email instead, you could do it like that too. And that's sort of generally true of stuff. If you want another text block, the main thing is that it's pretty particular about spacing on rows. So this is a row type called right sidebar, like this. And then this whole area in here is a row called one column. So if you wanted to have something where you had two images side by side or something like that, you'd probably need to pick either left sidebar or right sidebar, or a two column layout and stick that in the middle here in place of all this stuff being in the one column row. You'd make a new row that was a two column or one of those sidebar layouts, stick that in, and then move this text down to another one column row that was below it.
I used this functionality to put the social icons in when I was originally designing the email.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I noticed, and maybe this is something we should check on email or Aptiv, is that in certain platforms, I think specifically maybe with Outlook, it would take the social icons and like double the size. And so even though it looks small on most devices, like the Facebook icon would be like huge. And I'm wondering if the same will happen with a headshot that starts out small, but then certain platforms are going to upsize it, and it's going to look really bad.
Yeah. The other way you could get around that would be to, if you have somebody who's comfortable writing in HTML, you could drop an HTML block in here instead. Okay. It's was the next section I was going to get to anyway. But when we did the social media icons in here, you can see we just wrote a little style to govern them, and that includes things like a max width kind of stuff. And so when you look at the social media on there, they all line up and they stay pretty small.
Okay, would you, I mean, I don't write code. Would you be able to, would you guys be able to do that if we were to have that option if we did a photo?
Yeah, if you have a format you like, or you can kind of show me an example where it's like, do you want the headshot to the left of the sincerely and the signature, kind of how you want that to look, then we can build you a little HTML block that goes in place of that image block right here. It'll be another little block that says HTML like this, but when you double click on it, it'll have some pictures that are easy to edit. You can change the text and things like that. And then this last bit is just your standard organization info, and it automatically merges in the unsubscribe link at the bottom down here. Anything else I can tell you about this draft? So the idea is most of the writing and the layout and stuff like that is all pretty easy to do, drag and drop WYSIWYG style in these couple of text boxes and buttons and things like that. And that gets you the most functionality with the least amount of code, which is why this is sort of our preferred or suggested version.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The body text is broken up into two different white blocks. Is there a way we can connect those? Because I feel like sometimes for a viewer it might be slightly distracting, right? You start on a small white box, and then you've got a gray row, and then below that you start on your second box again.
We can reduce some of that, and one thing we can do is get rid of the, I believe what we have set here. What we might be able to, I was going to say, I think the way that you would get rid of that, yeah, is to change the background color on that whole section to be white. There you go. So then you'll still see it a little bit on here, but in the actual preview, yeah, there's still a little bit of a line, and some of that will have to do with the spacing in here. You know, if you wrote a lot more in that top box, it would come down lower below the button, or if you had a lot more text in this area, it would push this down farther.
Hey, Drew, I also had another question. I think we had, our boss still needs to look at this, and hopefully we can, Joe and I are going through tomorrow to look at it when we're all together. But I know Joe and I have made some comments on that shared Google Doc with additional feedback. And some of it is not included here, which is fine. But I think what we're going to try to do is, once we decide on an option, sit down with her, show her the option tomorrow, and then we can add feedback to that document, and then we can send you a note so that you're not having to look at multiple feedback. We'll just try to kind of make it all comprehensive in one place. Yeah,
no, that would be great. And I thought I had gotten everything from your initial feedback document that was like a specific change kind of thing. But if I missed something, let me know, and I can make another couple edits this afternoon or tonight before you guys go into your meeting.
Okay.
So that's the basics of using this as sort of our recommended version. Let me go back real quick and show you the two other versions we have. And then hopefully you agree and think, yes, we should use that one Drew recommends as the version that we focus on. But there are two other ways we came up with to solve, in particular, the issue of that top image rendering off a little bit in Outlook. So the first one is sort of the raw code version. So there's no doubt that this version really just looks the best. It gives you the most control. It also has, it's the only way of doing things that lets us do things like call your external style sheet. So you can actually change the font to be Museo Sans, for example, which is not a standard supported Engage font. In the version I was just showing you, the kind of hybrid version, or in the all Engage version, we have to use the style sheets that Salsa provides for us. And that doesn't include, you know, all the fonts you might want. It has a bunch, and we get pretty close. I think Toma was the one we came up with that was closest to that Museo Sans. But it is, by definition, slightly less perfect. So this is the email and acid test for the all code version. You know, same basic issues. You can, if you pay close attention though, you notice that the cropping is a little bit more consistent here. There isn't that sort of zooming in or zooming out between different versions of Outlook feel as much. And it also, on the bottom section, down here, the social media icons render with a little bit more consistent spacing between them. On some of the versions of Outlook, with the hybrid version, it wants to get rid of the spacing between those because it's basically throwing out CSS styling that it doesn't like. So those are the good parts of why you might want to do this one. The downside of it is to get that added control and get access to the head section of the email template, we have to write it all in code. And so when you go to the Create Email tab, instead of all the WYSIWYG thing where you can drag and drop stuff, this is what you get. So technically, you can still make all the changes you want, and it's it's all there and editable by you. Code in there, and you're dancing around a lot more tags and things like that. So I'm assuming this wouldn't work because one of your specifications was that you wanted the email templates to be pretty easy for anybody to use and for lots of different users to come in and make changes and edits to. And this definitely isn't that. I think what you'd probably want to do if you picked this version, what you'd really be saying is, actually, we'll write the emails in some other format. Like somebody will write a Google Doc of what they want the email to look like. Somebody else will take that Google Doc and put it into this format and template using Dreamweaver or Brackets or some HTML editing tool, and then we'll copy and paste the finished product into Salsa right before we hit send on the email. You can go in and do all the email editing in here, and it's, as a code editor, it's not horrible, but it's still your editing and raw code, which almost nobody would want to write that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we'd be setting ourselves up for trouble down the road.
Yeah, that's sort of.
I also don't know how to use Dreamweaver. So. Well, I mean, I could learn, but I don't know. I don't think many people here know how to use that.
Right. It's whole other problem to solve there. All right. So that's not the approach we're going to choose. So then, just to show you the last one. Is the all in engage one, and the main change we're making here from the hybrid one is really just with that header image. So this was, I was just using the Adobe tools in Engage. You could use something like Photoshop, which you have done in the past, to basically design this image at the top to be one specific image, upload it exactly as you want with the headline text already on top. So it just loads as a flat JPEG or PNG file or whatever you want. By putting it in as a single image, you can see on the desktop views, went too far, there we go. On the Outlooks, it does do much better with that. Doesn't have as many of the issues because it's not loading it as a style element where it's trying to pull the picture in the background and size it sort of at the same time. It's just reading the picture. That does solve that particular problem. But you're pretty constrained in terms of what you can do with editing the image if you don't use Photoshop. Aditi, I think you said you'd looked at this as well, but I'll just
I tried working with it, but I think it's hard when you use something like Photoshop and then use something like this.
Right.
But I think it's a little more limited, but it might work for us in terms of accessibility to others.
Exactly. So this one still has this HTML bit at the top, so you would still come in and edit your description text like that. But then in here, you can see this is just an image instead of an HTML block. And if we wanted to make a headline on the text like that, it doesn't let you do background colors, so that kind of gray shading in the background that we had on the other version, you can't do, but I'll just pick one of these. So pick our Bahama Oriole picture here, and you click edit, it brings up these Adobe tools. And that does make it pretty easy to put text on your picture and to move it around. So you can resize a little bit, you can move things around, and you can pick, within their available options, some basic fonts. Doesn't have the ones you guys tend to prefer. There's no Museo. There's no Sans, but there's some other things that are similar. So you'd have to get the right thing, and then you can pick whether you want the text to be black or white or whatever you want on here. You could also experiment if you were committed to this path. You can draw other basic shapes on there as a draw tool. So you can, it's pretty limited, as you can see, but if you wanted to do something like pick a solid color, and then draw it on here. This is not a very good job, but you get the idea. And then come on top of that and type your text instead. You can get, you know, something kind of like that effect, but it won't be, you know, quite as nice or precise as you're looking for. So there you go. You can do something like that. And then the nice part is it does, you know, it saves it as a new image. It doesn't overwrite your old picture. But so now this shows up as 2 Bahama Oriole with my little headline and stuff. So you'd insert that one instead of this one. And there you go. And it gives you, you know, it's the easiest to manage because it's all built in the Engage WYSIWYG. So it'd be pretty easy for somebody who doesn't ever use Photoshop or any other kind of design program to come in and go, oh, okay, I know how to do that. I can make a little thing. I can resize the picture. I can make it float right or left, you know, do any of the basic kind of things. So that was the pro con on that one is it gets you pretty close to the hybrid version. You know, it looks pretty good, except that we just can't replicate that, you know, semi-transparent background with a headline font in exactly the font you want without doing it all in Photoshop and then uploading it as a picture, which was something you were trying to get away from.
Question. I have a quick question for you. If we did go with this version, could we do it similarly to how we've done other pages where we have like an ABC color, like an orange or something that's a bar across the photo?
Yeah.
With headline in? That might work better, maybe.
Yeah.
But the only problem is I've done that in the past. It puts like a little border between the image and the headline. But in this case, the way you've done it here, that wouldn't be the case, right?
Yeah, because I'm editing right on the image. So you couldn't have transparency, and I don't think it lets you see if it's odd, but it doesn't have a shape drawing tool, so you can't come in and like, you know, have a resizable rectangle. You have to use this kind of brush tool thing, which requires a steady hand or concentration or something like that to try and get it, you know, just the way you want it.
Oh, I was wondering, there looks like the edge is like curved, and I was wondering what shape you had used there.
Yeah, just the only options in the brush tool are you can resize it, so you can have a bigger circle or a smaller circle to draw with, and then you can change the color.
Back in the day when I first started working at a nonprofit, I helped with design, and the only tool we had no money. So I think we used, what was it called? Was it called Paintbrush or Paint Bucket?
Yeah.
Microsoft tool. I used to
MS
design
Paint.
everything, and that it was a horrible experience.
Yeah. So I think, you know, if you went with this version, there's nothing, you know, like I said, this actually gets you pretty close without having to do very much code messing. But I do think you'd end up wanting to make these header images in Photoshop, just because it's going to be really hard to get them, you know, the spacing between the headline, the size of the font, the placement of it, and things like that. And then partly because, you know, because the toolbox of the Adobe tools on here is relatively limited, it's like each time you make a change and then commit it, it saves that change and you can't go back and edit it. So if you decided, oh wait, I didn't want that box to be gray, I wanted it to be orange, you basically have to start over and make a new, you know, background and then a new headline text on top of it. So they're not, it's not as good as Photoshop tools by any means. It just gets you a very little bit of basic functionality, and it's really designed to like recolor images or add borders or, you know, little things like that. And so the stuff that it's better at doing are not the specific things you want to do in this image placement, which is put text and some sort of background behind the text over top of an existing image.
I was thinking about Drew, and I think that in terms of accessibility for the staff, options 1 and 3 are almost identical, because the same people who don't use Photoshop are the same ones that are going to feel intimidated to go and change the copy to move the shaded box if they need to from the top of the image down to the bottom. So I think in terms of streamlining staff time, they're about the same. So a deciding factor could potentially be just which one looks better. And it sounded like you were saying that the first option is showing up better, correct, in Outlook than the third one?
I mean, I think they're pretty comparable. So this is the third one. Let me sort of give you a side by side. This was the first one. So a little bit tricky because I changed pictures between the versions. But so this is the desktop on the hybrid version. A little tiny previews, but here, I'll just pick Outlook 2011. So that's how it looks on the hybrid version. And then this is how it looks on the all engage one. Hybrid, all engage. So it's really, I mean, it's not that different except for you can't have background on these headline areas as easily as you can on here. But yeah, I would think either approach could be fine, and it would really depend on what your team thought about. Do we want to develop some skills with basic HTML editing? Is that a useful thing for people to know just enough about? So we commit to that path because that's a set of skills we're happy to train people on who are going to be writing and sending emails. Or do we not want anybody to mess with graphic design except for Aditi and whoever else has Photoshop? In which case, we're going to go with this version, the all engage one, and then they have to come ask for help when they do graphics, but that's okay because we want them to do that for consistency purposes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well,
hey, Drew, and it's not just Photoshop, man. I also know Paintbrush.
All right, yeah, MS Paint when we bring that in. that would look about as good as the Adobe tools, I think. I don't think you have as many font choices. So that's basically what I wanted to sort of show you or have you guys talk about. Still totally possible to make edits to all these versions. So little things like you wanted to get rid of this gray background on this whole section, reduce that down just to a little gray line between the two rows there. That kind of stuff. We can make more of those changes if you want. But we'll stick with the version 1 and version 3, the hybrid version and the all engage version. We will, at the end of this process, we'll give you the raw source code, so the same stuff that's in the all HTML version that I showed you, all that code. We'll give it to you, and you can just save it in a folder somewhere and forget about it if you want. But if you ever moved off of Engage, or if you ever wanted to, set up an email in ActBlue or something because you're going to start raising money for candidates, I don't know, but whatever you want to do, you'll have all the actual source code, so you can go copy and paste it into some other program or system in the future and should reproduce pretty faithfully what we've done here. So the last thing is, those were all 3 versions of one template. We do have 2 other templates in here. The newsletter one, which I kept accidentally clicking on the acid test to show you. So it looks like this right now. I just picked a lot of owl pictures for kind of placement there. There you go. So that's what that one's looking like right now. Happy to get edits and changes on that whenever you have a minute. Some parts are the same, so you notice the social buttons at the bottom and this like contact us text and stuff like that. That's the same essentially as in the action alert and fundraising template. So, but most of the other elements in here are different. And this one didn't have the newsletter. This actually kind of is all Engage content in here. Because you didn't specifically, the example you'd kind of shown me didn't have text on these, or they were kind of already uploaded. So again, that header area, same as in the action alert on, this sort of hidden block of text at the very top. But other than that, all of this stuff is just text blocks, button blocks, basic things in the Engage system. So that should be really easy for anybody to go edit. And if you wanted to add another, row of things down here, you could just come into Elements and drag in more images or more text blocks or whatever you wanted in there.
That's nice. That's really nice.
Yeah, so that should be super easy to work with.
Yeah, I like the look of this a lot. I think it's pretty clean. Can we look at it on a phone?
Yeah.
I'm just curious about how it all stacks up.
Let's see. That's the 5S. That's about the smallest it gets. So it does mean, when you're thinking about writing these things, the kind of main content blocks, right now we have 4 of them. It stacks those into one column, which is what you'd sort of expect or whatever from responsive design. But that does mean you get a lot of them. Could be a lot of scrolling in that middle part of the newsletter. So you may want to think about what's the right number of stories to aim for on there. Thinking specifically about phones, do you want 2 stories at the top, or is 1 really better because then you don't have to scroll very much before you get to the featured action?
Also curious to know is like in terms of the photo size, like it seems like the length for particularly the owl photo takes up a lot of space. I wonder if that should be narrower. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's something you can totally over in here. So one thing, if you decided that you had pictures in here that were a little bit too tall, you can just sort of shrink them down a little bit, and they'll take up a little bit less room that way. When you get to phone, you have to make them pretty small though before it'll really affect the phone layout. It'll be smaller, but you'll still have to scroll by it. It's just not a lot of real estate on telephones. So you can also think about just getting rid of the pictures in some of the blocks, so that it goes by a little faster. And obviously you can upload the sample you had given me had a kind of more square in here. It was like square block of pictures, square block of text, and then a little button. But if you went with something that was more of a horizontal image, just all about this Bahama Oriole today.
I don't know about Didi, but okay, there it goes.
Yeah.
I lost your picture there for a minute.
Okay. So, if you went with something that was a horizontal layout instead, that'll also reduce your scrolling a lot. So that's sort of an editorial decision you can make case by case in the newsletter, what you think looks good. Though then you'll end up, if you go with a mix of horizontal and vertical image styles, you get this kind of mismatched column thing on monitor with bigger screens.
I kind of like it though. I mean, maybe not in this order, but it's kind of nice to vary the photo sizes. Maybe not drastically. It just kind of makes it a little bit more, I don't know, appealing to my eyes. At least I don't know, Joe might have different thoughts on it.
Yeah, it'd be nice to experiment a little bit.
Yeah, and I think you guys can, totally mess around with that in different newsletters and see what looks good to you, and also what how many stories you really have. Like, what's the balance of how many things people want to put in the newsletter versus what really looks good design-wise. Usually the problem people have is like everybody wants to put every single story in the newsletter, and there's no good way to make that much content lay out well. So whenever possible, we always say, try and cut it down and have just a couple stories in your newsletter, and then focus on making them look really nice. And you can add another text block that's like, click here to read everything from the blog from the last month or whatever.
I'm curious to know, in terms of these different photos, did you upload them as certain sizes, and then did you shift the size within Salsa, or did you already have them at this exact size?
No, this was all stuff that was already in your Engage Center. So what we always try and do is use pictures that you're already using, because I assume that is relatively consistent. So some of them were uploaded. The original Bahama Oriole, you kind of tell from the text on the side, actually was a little bit smaller. I'm not sure where it was originally used. Yeah, but that's a 550, width image, and the L's at the top were clearly designed to be a bigger image. So we tried to pick something that was not radically the wrong size for the place we were putting it in, but we just uploaded those. And in fact, you can see, so like this is that same owl picture as below, but here it's in a slightly smaller spot, so Engage just sort of shrinks it down a little bit.
Joe, what's the Bahama Oriole photo for?
It's a story in September e-news.
Okay. I'm just curious, as I don't know, that photo size is different. I mean, not to say it's bad, but we should talk about, I like that size, actually. I don't think it's bad. We should talk about which sizes we should use for the e-news moving forward. In terms of, like, do we want to keep varying it so that the banner photo is kind of this size, but then we have more rectangular photos, like, say, owls or whatever?
Yeah, we should talk about that.
I'd say it's a little bit misleading, in the WYSIWYG here, the actual maximum width on the email template is 600 pixels wide, and there's a little bit of padding on the outside as well. So 550 pixels wide is about the right size really to be in there, which is why when you look at the...
Yeah, it was really throwing me when I first started formatting the emails in here, because anytime I put a photo in, the photo looked like really low resolution because it kept sizing it up.
Right, it makes it really big while you're in the editor, but when you actually get the email, it does a nice job of bringing it down. So yeah, you can see on a normal viewer, that's about the right size. That top owl picture, or that Oriole picture, actually looks pretty good. So that's the e-newsletter template. And then the last one is the bird of the week, which is also, doesn't have too much complicated stuff in it. So this one was the, as a test on it.
Oh, we're having an open house today. I should have invited you guys.
Should come by.
I know you're not around, but I should have invited John.
That's right. I think he's out. He had a PTA or a thing with his kids this afternoon, so he's out this afternoon.
Oh, okay. Well, then he couldn't have made it. So, well, extend the invitation to him.
There you go. I'll definitely invite him now that we know he can't come. That's the best kind. So the main HTML blocks in here are, that's the headline for the name of the bird of the week. And then this little fast facts thing where we wanted to have kind of a background color to it. It looks like we need to do a little bit more work getting that to lay out right in all the different formats. So I'm looking at the wrong version. Right. So just this kind of two column-ish thing. We probably could actually do that with a 2-column text block. So I may go experiment with a different approach to that one. But in general, this was mostly a fair number of HTML blocks in here because the way we laid it out. Oh, we got rid of our...
I think in general, I liked it, except I think in the original, we should look at it, but I think the thing that bothers me is that the white lines between the areas, if there's a way we could have one connected, like, white background, I think that would be helpful, maybe.
Yeah.
And just it's similar to the e-news, similar to what we're asking for in the fundraising email. Just, white all the way down as the background and then gray gutters.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. We went a little too far with this gray background idea.
That's how I remember it too as well.
Okay.
Or I mean, that's how I remember us discussing it.
Okay. So maybe I'll go do a little bit of work on this one this afternoon and send you a new draft that has that change in the background at least. And I think I have thought of a better way to do the fast facts section in particular.
So hey Drew, tomorrow what we'll do is I think the fundraising action alert email and then the e-news are probably closest to done, and we can sit down with our supervisor and at least look through those two.
Okay.
And then send you, we can either add comments to that. We could probably just add comments to that checklist that we have going.
Yeah, that's fine. I went through on the action alert one in particular. I went through and crossed off or did strike through on the ones that I thought I had taken care of. Okay. So feel free to tell me, nope, you didn't get that one right, or you said you did that, but you didn't, or whatever. Find to correct my record keeping as well as add more edits that you want to see. Okay. Well, anything else I can show you or tell you about email templates this week?
Well, I think we just have some talking to do.
Yeah.
Internally to get back to you. But it's been very helpful.
Great. Send all your edits my way. Happy to make a bunch more changes to these over the next week or so. And I'll also put up the first draft version of the action alert page and the social media page, the sharing page for actions. Probably later this week, but it might be Monday by the time I send you the draft.
So how are you coming up with that, Drew? I don't think we talked much about that in detail, so I'm curious.
Oh yeah, so my understanding, sort of where and how you want the approach to work is we'll put a draft WordPress page up with an embedded action in it, and then since that's how you're using them now, and so we'll just write some styles onto the WordPress side and design the action and engage, and then we'll come and do a sort of a road test like this, only instead of looking at email on Acid and engage, I'll show you engage in one window and then the WordPress in the other. And it'll basically be, just like you've been doing, but we'll write some additional styles that just help things work a little more smoothly. And then on the share part in particular, it's usually a matter of going through the steps in Engage's social sharing things, and then also backing that up, especially when you embed actions on a WordPress page or an exterior site like that. You essentially have to redo some of that work. So we may put an extra plugin on your WordPress site. I haven't gone to look what's there now, but you want those two values to agree. Usually when the sharing doesn't work, what's happening is that Engage is sending one set of values. When you share this action on Facebook, this is what the headline should be, this is what the picture should be, this is the description text, that kind of stuff. And then it's getting essentially conflicting information from WordPress because there's some other set of styles wrapped around your WordPress site that Facebook is looking at, and it gets confused. And so sometimes it picks one and it's the wrong one, and sometimes it just doesn't pick anything at all. It just kind of goes kerplode.
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed on the head. So I've had continued discussions with Michelle about this, and the conclusion we came to is basically that when Facebook is looking at these pages, sorry about that. I'm going to shut my window. It's unable, because of the embed, it's unable to see any of the data that we have in Salsa. And so what it's doing is trying to just scrape from the page itself. And the page doesn't have that kind of data that it would need. It doesn't have the photo, for example. And even when we've embedded a photo on the page, I'm sorry, not embedded, but we've added a featured image for the page, Facebook still isn't finding that. Yeah. So it sounds like you're on the right path. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah.
So one question for you, I can go build sort of like with the email templates. It's like sort of how would you like to skin the cat? So one thing we can do is we can just fix the problem on the WordPress side The other option would be, which basically will install a new plugin, or look at if you have a plugin there, reconfigure it slightly so that it pulls the right data. Or if you want, you could do something completely different, which is go to not embedding your actions on WordPress and just using the Engage pages to do it. And then in theory, the Engage tools should work just fine if the action isn't embedded somewhere else. But it would be different than what you've been doing. You'd have to, we dress up the Engage pages to look a little bit nicer. But ultimately, it won't be as seamless with your website, because the main thing that'll change is instead of people going to take the action at an address like abcbirds.org/takeaction, it'll be an address like abcbirds.org/engage/salsa/u/number. And that's where they...
Yeah, I would prefer that they remain embedded, because we've got a plan down the road to we're hoping to eventually be able to advertise these using a Google grant we have, and I know they have to be with our own domain for that to happen. And we also are just finding it's really nice that we've got them embedded. It makes it easy for people to obviously navigate around the website. We've got a seamless design there. So
so I think
whatever we have to do, that's just trying to make the embed work.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense to me, and that won't be any problem at all. What it probably means is you'll actually get to kind of skip a step. It's like, you can still fill in the values on Engage for what you want the social share content to be, but ultimately we'll come up with a way to write those values into the WordPress page through a plugin, and that'll make it easier and more consistent.
Okay, yeah, that's great.
Cool.
Then as far as the user experience goes, I mean, I just want to make sure we're on the same wavelength. That it's going to be, basically the page we have right now, the landing page we have right now, and you would click sign petition, and you go from that page directly to our post action domain page, rather than have to go to what Salsa calls the action page, right, where you have the option to ask again to send the email, and then you've got your Facebook, and then you've got your Twitter share. What we think is most effective is just make it very simple on the front. It's a one-click process. You click to send an email, and then on the post-action donate page, if you want to share there, you can find the Twitter and you can find the Facebook share options. And the great thing about that is that those are basically working for us because they're, it's a little bit complicated. Maybe I should just tell you. So the way we're finding Salsa working right now is that Salsa has two different sorts of social shares. So they've got the social shares that you see as icons. The icons are working fine. The ones that aren't working are the ones that are on the so-called action page. So what that means basically is that we don't need to worry about, I don't think we're even going to have to worry about the social share, because we're not going to have social shares on our landing page. And once people click to go through, they're going to go to another Salsa page, the post-action donate page, and there we can just use Salsa's social share icons, which are working. So I think, actually, now that I think about this, and sorry I didn't do that before, I think we might be able to just skip that step through.
Okay. So skip this sort of middle action step?
That's exactly it, yeah. So it's basically, you're on your landing page, you click send to email, and then you go to the post-action donate page, which we already have set up. So it's just as simple as just sending a redirect to that next page.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think, so that might be, Facebook.
So we actually sent out an email last Saturday for the first time to people asking them to take action on these new Salsa targeted action pages, and got back 20 emails from people complaining that they didn't understand the process. So our fear that this was going to be confusing to people have been realized.
Right. It's a little bit counterintuitive. Yeah, I think we should be able to get around that by sort of redesigning the Engage side a little bit. And then, so we might have some additional steps, like, when you're creating a new targeted action, select these couple of boxes or pick this particular structure. and then embed it. And essentially, we'll just be skipping a bunch of steps. We'll kind of hardwire that into the version.
Okay, that sounds right.
No. Yeah, so I think we're on the same page here, and that all makes sense. Cool.
Drew, so I'm away next week, and then Joe, what's your vacation schedule?
Then I'll be gone the following week.
All right. So, but I feel like in terms of these two new projects you're working on, Joe is the lead anyhow. And then when I come back, I'm happy to jump in terms of any additional email stuff that needs to be done.
Great. And like I said, our plan has always been to try and get this wrapped up, by no later than late October, or middle October, I should say. So, the ideal timeline for us would be, if you get us edits you want on the email templates next week, we can work on that while we build first draft of the action page and sharing page, and get some feedback from Joe in particular on that one. And then we'll basically just be finishing things up, making any last little tweaks and changes, second week of October, and then done. Until we break something else and think of what else we want to do.
Well, no, I forget, and I'm so sorry, my email is a mess, but did you send me an estimate for getting all those other lists in through your vendor or whomever? Because I think we're not going to have the time to do that. So we're going to have a discussion, I think, on the 16th, and having an estimate for that would be really helpful. And then we can, go to the team and say it's going to cost X amount additional dollars to get all the lists, all the groups in. So if you could send me something, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think I sent you something, but I may need to update it as well, because we did get faster as we went through the process.
Yeah. I remember you sending me the original, but I figured that quote had changed based on the process.
Yeah, let me go take a look at it. I'll send you a revised bid.
Okay. And if we do that, we can just, I think, amend the existing contract, and it won't be as difficult as the initial contract. I think right now the initial contract ends on the 15th, but I think we might just need to at least extend that for a week, just so that Joe and I can be in the office at the same time in case there's anything else that needs to kind of go through both of us. So if it's okay with you, can we extend the contract at least through the 20th or 23rd of October?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
And you guys are more sticklers than we are about sort of timing of invoices and stuff. So if you get to a point where you feel like, wait, I think we're out of contracted hours, but we want another change to the template or the website or something like that, just email and we'll let you know. If I'm like, wait, that's way outside the scope of work, then I'll tell you. But otherwise, we're happy to just come back and make a little change, even if it's after the 15th.
Okay, awesome.
Drew, can I ask you one last question before hang up? Because I may be sending out the e-news this afternoon, and since I missed out on the second part of the call yesterday, I just wanted to confirm something. So when I'm sending out, when we want to use the e-news now, I'm a little bit confused because I know that the e-news list that you updated was basically the list as it stood when we left Lemonade Online in July, and we've got new people who signed up since then. Right. So is the idea that we would use both the list that you have, the real list, the CRM list, and then somehow use the other list, the one we have right now, I think the smart list, the one that would have the new email signups in the last 2 months?
Yes, that is the idea.
Okay.
While we're talking, what if you were going to send it out? Forget about the CRM side right now, but if you were just going to send it with the Engage list, is it a list in here called e-newsletter, or what would that look like?
Yes.
And it's just a group in here?
Yep.
Just gotta see if I can find it real quick. E-news. No, I think I just found it.
Yeah,
There we go. 31,000 something. Because what I also can do is just create you a new, yeah, there you go. Subscribe, edition, fundraise, targeted action. So if you want, what I can do is go in and just add an additional rule in there that pulls in the CRM group for e-news as well.
Absolutely, that would be fantastic. So once that rule is set up, then we can begin to disregard actually clicking on the CRM list. We can just use the smart group and engage, right? Knowing that that group is going to pull the CRM in as well.
Correct.
Okay, well that makes life very simple for us. That would be fantastic.
So long as you remember to go turn on the sync between CRM and Engage for that particular group about a day in advance.
I just know that one day that's not going to happen.
Right.
I can't wait till Salsa fixes this.
Yeah.
It'd be nice. But okay.
Do you know if you've done that already? Turned on because I also can't query for them until.
I haven't. No, I haven't. I haven't turned it on.
Let's see if it shows up in here. It shouldn't.
I guess, gosh, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but I should probably ask while you're on the phone. Do we need to do something similar for the opt-out list too as well?
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll build another or clause in here that's or is in the e-news signups opt-in group from CRM and is not in the e-news opt-outs group from CRM. So it's just like when you were building them in Illuminate, I think, you would select is a member of this group and is not a member of that group, is a member of the opt-ins, not a member of the opt-outs, and that creates the mailing list. Same basic structure here. And it does not have e-news opt-ins or opt-outs. Okay. So if it's all right with you, I'll go turn on the sync in CRM. And then once that finishes putting the data into Engage, I'll edit this, save it, send you a link, and you can just give it a once over, make sure that it all looks all right.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Cool. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Well, good catching up with you guys. More stuff coming shortly, starting with this group, and then a slightly revised Bird of the Week template as well. And then let me know if you think of other edits and changes to the emails in particular this week.
Thanks a lot, Drew.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Hey, Dee, did you want to stay on for a minute?